Good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to be here today to talk about UAVs from the perspective of an aerial target drone manufacturer and operating company. I've worked for Meggitt Target Systems for 29 years, starting out operating the targets around the world on land and at sea. Initially, these were under visual control using high-powered binoculars, flying the targets manually on the sticks. The same as radio-controlled aircraft. That was how I got into the business from an interest in RC models. Later on, we introduced an autopilot system and guided the targets using radar. Then we moved to GPS when that later became available. That was in the late 80s, early 90s. Today, the targets are operated semi-autonomously using computers and waypoint navigation. Manual piloting skills are no longer required, and the targets are recovered by parachute rather than landing on the belly skid, which was quite a challenge. But of course, you now need the skills on how to pack parachutes, which is monotonous, to say the least. Operations beyond visual control and at night time are now normal practice for us. There you go. Military air power developed rapidly during the 20th century. This drove the requirement for air defense systems to combat the military air power. Those in turn needed to practice. Actually hitting aircraft with anti-aircraft guns did prove to be quite a challenge. During the First World War, they took artillery pieces and rolled them up banks to try and engage the aircraft. But up until the 50s, that was the main method of anti-aircraft air defense was gun systems. One of the first US aerial target systems was produced by the Radio Plane Company in the mid-1930s, which you can see in on the slide behind me. Marilyn Monroe was famously photographed in 1945 on their production line, when she was Norma Jean, of course. In 1952, Radio Plane became Northrop and went on to produce other aerial targets, including the KD-2R, which had a 1600cc McCulloch engine, and of course the BQM-74, the Chucker, which was jet-powered. At the other end of the scale, there are full-size targets, such as the QF-4, which is no longer used, which I've been lucky enough to see in operation myself in USA, and the QF-16, which is still in service today. At the higher end of the target market are the supersonic targets. These ones illustrated here simulate anti-ship sea-skimming missiles. The one on the top left, an MA-31, was based on a Russian missile system and used by the US as a target. That's no longer in production. On the top right, we have the GQM-163, the Coyote, which is still used today. And below it, the AQM-37, again, still in service today. And at the bottom, the multi-stage supersonic target, which is a two-stage system. The target flies under jet propulsion for part of its mission, then the front half, which is rocket-powered, separates and engages the ship. That program hasn't come into service. As I understand it, it may have been put on hold or cancelled. Past to present, in the subscale sector, there's some of the targets here, the Pchela out of Russia, Jindvik, which was operated in the UK from 1952 to 1986, and until it flew through an old couple's car who was sitting on the cliff at Llanbedr in Wales, watching it. Skewer out of South Africa, the BQM 34 Firebee, Chucker from Northrop, which is still available today, and the MQM 107, of which there are some available around the world. Jet targets that are available today on the left are the the Merak 100, which is launched by using JATO bottles, rocket bottles, and below it the BQM 167, also launched using JATO bottles. But there's been a move of late due to shrinking defence budgets to go to lower cost targets. On the right we have the Banshee Jet 80, which is one of our products from Meggitt, which is very popular and been in service here in Israel for 3 or 4 years, and we've conducted about 30 campaigns to date. And below it, the BQM 177, which is the Firejet out of US. Both of these two targets are launched by catapult launchers, which takes away the cost, the hazard, the maintenance, and the transportation problems related with using the JATO bottles. And here's a video of one of our jet targets in test, actually. This is our Jet 40 airframe with a 55 kilogram thrust engine in it, which was a test program just to test the new engine prior to us installing 2 of these engines into a twin engine version of the target called the Jet 110, which I'll touch on later. This is a weave maneuver which has been requested by one of our customers to simulate the terminal stage maneuvering of an anti-ship missile. And the final stage of the flight, of course, is the parachute deployment. Unlike surveillance UAVs, the aerial targets tend to labour in obscurity. They don't get as much press, but they perform an important role in the development of weapon systems and the training on those weapon systems once they're in service. So they actually make their contribution long before those weapon systems are used in anger in a hostile environment. We conduct complicated missions. We'll have several aircraft in the air at one time of different types. We'll also often have marine targets in the water at the same time, and static targets as well for missiles to engage on for tactical missions with our customers, particularly Navy customers. We have to, as a business, we need to keep tabs on the evolving threats out there in the marketplace so that we can produce targets or payloads to go in existing targets to replicate those threats, to keep our customers supplied with realistic target services. Safety and regulation. There's a worldwide effort to put in place a regulatory framework for UAVs. Now, for aerial targets, we're normally operating in segregated airspace. We're not operating overpopulated areas. We don't need see and avoid. The airspace is cleared of any air traffic, because of course they're generally firing missiles or guns in that area anyway, so no guy in the right mind would want to be in that bit of airspace. But we find that there isn't really a common approach to regulating aerial targets. We generally fall under military rules, and often we have to meet the requirements, the same requirements that full-size aircraft have to meet, because they don't have any separate regulation that they can regulate us under. For the UK, our targets have to have a military aircraft release, they have to have a military registration, an extensive safety case in order to allow them to fly. Other nations, thankfully, are a little more pragmatic, so it's easier to operate, but UK has very busy airspace and it's a small area, so maybe their approach is understandable. As I said, we provide multiple threat scenarios. We'll have high-level targets, doing high dive, sea skimming targets, boat targets, all approaching a ship at the same time to fully exercise their combat systems. But we have to make sure that we do meet any evolving threats. Experimental or amateur build targets are flooding the markets now. The quadcopter drones get a lot of press, especially in the UK. Their latest usage is dropping drugs into prisons, but they're now trying to squash that. But the emerging requirements for safety are, we always keep our eye on that and try and keep up with it so that we don't get prevented from providing our services to customers. Mission reliability. We have to make sure our systems are reliable, not only for our own sake, but for our customers. If we're doing a Navy mission or an air-to-air mission, it costs our customers a lot of money to field the assets, the ships and the aeroplanes, so the last thing they want is targets going unserviceable and them having to wait for us. So reliability is very important, but on the other hand, we have to balance the amount of redundancy that we'll put in place to ensure a mission comes off against cost, because another important factor for our customers is that our targets are not too expensive. The one major element of our system is the flight termination system that is used to ensure that a target doesn't exit a range area uncontrolled. All our targets are fitted with that system, and it's a requirement in the UK. Defence budgets are shrinking, and we've found that's been advantageous to us because a lot of the high-end jet targets, our customers are moving to the lower cost targets that we're able to provide. So we are actually doing quite well at the moment. We're currently manufacturing about 40 targets per month. Modelling and simulation. We firmly believe that the aerial target is an important part of the training. Some of it can be met with simulation. The UK, again, use simulation to a point, but their gunners always have to be checked out on firing a live missile, because we've seen where people have relied purely on simulation and then complicated scenarios, but when faced with a real aerial target, just a single target, and have to fire a single missile, they don't succeed. Partial or total replication of the threat profile. Again, there's a trade-off there. With our target, we will generally try and replicate the terminal phase of a missile, which is the most important part. and also the fidelity, the maneuverability. We can't achieve what some of the higher end targets can do, but we can provide more assets at a lower price. The market for aerial targets is around 400 million a year. We probably, in terms of volume, targets into the market, we're just over 10%, but in terms of value, we're hardly on the scale, unfortunately. Some of the bigger programs where the larger, some of the nations like China and US take the lion's share of that, but mainly from domestic market. We're seeing a move from ownership of systems and operation by militaries around the world to services. We try to keep pace with the evolution of weapon systems, as I said before. We're currently designing and producing new targets, and we're adding new capabilities to our existing targets. For example, we have a device called an active radar homing emulator, which goes in the nose of target, and it simulates an anti-ship missiles radar seek ahead. And that's a very popular payload for our Navy customers. We do have over-the-horizon control capability on some of our boat systems out of Canada. That uses the satellite link, but of course that does come at a cost. Not such an issue for aerial targets because it's easier to attain a line of sight unless you're sea skimming. We work to keep our costs under control to make sure that we can offer the benefit to our customers. And also the maintenance and operation, we ensure that the systems are relatively cheap to operate. And we offer modular systems. Our target is really only a platform to carry the payloads so that we can add infrared payloads, radar payloads, etc. to the target, which is largely transparent to radar because it's composite, so we can configure it to the customer's requirements. Here's the range of targets that we have. Down at the bottom, we've got air-to-surface or surface-to-surface. Our boats get used for laser-guided bombing, for example. Simulating land vehicles, but often the ranges are at sea. We have for man-pad weapons, we have the small snipe target, and above it, the Banshee target, which is the propeller-driven one. But what we sell more of now are jet targets. Prior to 2010, probably 100% of our targets were propeller. Now we're looking at 60% of them are jet. So we've got the single jet, the twin jet 80, a new product coming online next year is the Jet 110, which will be 200 meters per second speed plus. And then above that, you'll see a small sub-target mounted under the Jet 110. That's the ALST. That will be an air-launched supersonic target, which will be capable of speeds up to Mach 4. But keep an eye on us for that. We hope to be able to provide that capability by the end of next year. Final video. This is a mission that we conduct for the Spanish Air Force. The engagement of the targets is conducted 70 kilometers away using Eurofighter and F-18s up at about 15,000 feet, both with missiles and guns. And we have to keep a target in the air constantly, so we operate a relay system, hence so many targets on the ground. So we'll have another target outbound when the one on station is being engaged, and we send that one back while they're engaging the second one, and so on and so forth. Generally, it's a busy operation. In about a day and a half, we'll do 40 sorties. Thank you very much. Thank you.